The Australian Human Rights Commission is once again proving what a useless prop of an organisation it is. It has become the United Nations of Australia, so entrenched in woke ideology and motivated by radical politics. I was baffled this morning to read in the Australian newspaper that the Commission is now joining a push to change the definition of terrorism in this country. The Commission wants religion to no longer count as a motivation for terrorist acts, while 15 Muslim groups want both religion and ideology to no longer count. So let me just break this down. These groups think that all it takes is to change the definition of terrorism, and that will just magically solve all the issues associated with terror. Do they just want us to ignore when religious phrases like Allah Akbar and Allah is the greatest and so on are shouted before, during and after a terror attack? Now, this change would mean that if a jihadi was indeed inspired by radical Islam and goes on a killing spree, well, too bad, not terror. We'll just call it another incident and swiftly move on, nothing at all to do with religion. In its submission to the Independent National Security Legislation Monitor, the groups led by the Australian Muslim Advocacy Network argue that the current laws disproportionately target their communities. It says the persistence of this association between Islam and terrorism in official discourse, whether through prosecutions, political statements or legislative design, has lent credibility to the false and dangerous notion that Islam itself is a source of violence. Well, 13 of the 16 terrorist attacks in Australia since 2014 were religiously motivated, and according to ASIO, 12 were driven by Islamist violent extremism. And that's a fact. It's certainly not disproportionate. Our laws are not disproportionate to one community when the bulk of evidence points to one pocket of a community. Now, of course, the majority of Muslims live peacefully in this country and would not interpret the Quran or other sacred religious texts as any form of incitement or jihad. But Islamic extremism is incompatible with Western democracies. So too, extreme Islamic preaching, also incompatible with Western democracies. And we can't just dance around this and change the laws because it makes people feel better. It actually requires those groups which are calling for said change to come out and denounce every terror attack which has been motivated by radical Islam, whether it be in Australia or overseas, every single one. Yet how many of these Muslim groups actually do? In September, in Manchester, a man by the name of Jihad al-Shami drove a car into pedestrians outside a synagogue and then proceeded to stab them, with 2 Jews being killed in the terror attack. The Australian Muslim Advocacy Network is spearheading this terror law change, yet I am yet to find any evidence that a statement was made by this group in the wake of Manchester. And secondly, it also requires Muslim groups to denounce literal interpretation of verses in sacred texts that call for jihad. Take the Sahih Bukhari, for example, which says, quote, Allah's messenger said, the hour will not be established until you fight with the Jews, and the stone behind which a Jew will be hiding will say, O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, so kill him. Now, many Muslims would argue those passages are not a command or an incitement, rather a prediction. But this disproportionate argument by these 15 groups does not stack up. The Australian is also reporting that Anglican organisations supported changes to remove religion as a form of terrorist motivation in solidarity with Muslim groups. Now, this is truly, truly extraordinary. Has the Anglican Church forgotten that almost a dozen members of a Kenyan Anglican church were murdered by al-Shabaab militants in 2014 in 2 attacks, including one when a bus travelling to Nairobi was stopped by terrorists who boarded and asked each passenger to take a faith test. Anyone who failed to recite Quran verses was shot. And then, of course, there's the useless Australian Human Rights Commission, which ought to be defunded, warning that linking religion and terrorism stigmatises faith groups. So it's all about a perception, all about people's feelings, hurt feelings. Not at all about shootings, stabbings, mass murders, beheadings, kidnappings, rape, torture, the countless number of innocent victims around the world, many in the name of radical Islam and Allah Akbar. But we will all just pretend and make it all go away by changing our laws just because it feels like the right thing to do. It will put us all at risk and only inspire those who seek us harm, especially those whose values are incompatible with ours and incompatible with a Western democracy. Now, let's hope Labor shuts this down immediately, or will the Prime Minister call for another Islamophobia review to save face?